And Habermas initially came from the Marxist critical theory school, but then developed his own stuff. Now, Habermas has at his core the idea that everything humans do is based on communication, that it is the unique characteristic of human interaction that it's based on speech. And by speech, he doesn't necessarily just mean verbal speech, but just some kind of communication. So he argues that based on communicative action, so any kind of verbal or nonverbal cues, humans create consensus and thus social control. So his social order is created through basically consensus of people. Therefore, he's more of a consensus-oriented sociologist. And he thinks that humans, when they interact, they create, or they are within the life world. And by life world, he just refers to unregulated spheres of society, kind of the everyday world, the socialization patterns and everything that humans create themselves. And humans also create a system. That is, not everything is just within the unregulated life world, but sometimes humans create regulated systems. So by systems, he's referring to like money or formal institutions or politics or economics and so on and so forth. And what's quite interesting is that this works well, usually, but sometimes the systems, or this has like over time, this did happen in most of the world, over time the systems, money, power, economics, they split off from the life world and kind of got a life of their own and started, creating a system of rationality, a system of operating, which doesn't serve the life world anymore. So in order to understand what's happening when these systems split off from the life worlds, we need to understand different types of rationality, different types of going about navigating the world. Habermas argues that life worlds are fundamentally navigated through communicative rationality. By that he means, again, consensus, where humans think in order to get mutual understanding, where humans act in order to get consensus and mutual understanding. And here again, communicative rationality is really based on speech acts. Importantly, in order for a speech act to become valid, that is, in order for it to actually achieve what it's meant to achieve, humans need to discern that the speech act is, done in good faith, that it's based on facts, that it's right with respect to its normative context, and again that the speech act is expressed by the speaker with true intentions. So this really requires humans to be honest and say what they think and really aim at consensus already. And the systems, rather, the systems, so money, power, economics, politics, whatnot, they operate based on cognitive instrumental rationality. This means that instead of aiming at mutual consensus and understanding, they're really aimed at realizing certain goals. So everything is done just with the intention of achieving one goal. It's a little bit like #Slytherin or whatnot. I guess we can kind of even compare it to nonviolent communication and violent communication, but perhaps not. The thing is that none of these exist in their pure form, like communicative rationality and cognitive instrumental rationality. They're ideal types, and neither are any of them problematic in and of themselves. Like cognitive instrumental rationality, which is really instrumental, is not problematic in and of itself if it's used in the system for the goals of the system, like money and economics and whatnot. But the cognitive instrumental rationality has been increasingly becoming the rationality of the life world. so that actions that were before oriented at mutual understanding are rather being approached instrumentally to get success. So here we had an example of the women's shelters, which we came up with ourselves, where, just to kind of bring the whole thing together, the life worlds, which was the unregulated sphere of society, the life world had this idea of, hey, we need, we don't want people to be discriminated against. So the life world created a system, or kind of gave the task of anti-discrimination to a law. And the law then, however, became so stringent and so bureaucratized and so full of paperwork that it stopped serving the life world that created it, and rather became dominating the life world through checkups, through anti-discrimination forms that need to be filled out. And in a women's shelter in Denmark, I believe, there was an issue where men were not being employed by the women's shelter, and this then became an anti-discrimination case. So here, instead of using communicative rationality, which is oriented at just getting the best bang for the buck for everybody towards mutual understanding, the system with its cognitive instrumental rationality started dominating the narrative, started dominating the problem, and said, no, anti-discrimination law, article blah, this and this, you need to fill out this form, and you need to employ men. So the initial purpose of anti-discrimination law is forgotten, and it starts colonizing the life world, which is very interesting, problematic. Now, Habermas had some more important arguments. For instance, Habermas is, he had this idea of like what law is. I already went into anti-discrimination law a little bit, and Habermas initially started off with the conceptualization that there's two forms of law, one of them being an institution by the life world, which is always legitimated through morality, and which is like really bottom up. And on the other hand, law being a medium by the system to colonize the life world, where here law is imposed by the economic or political system and is kind of top down. This would be, for instance, welfare law, which, again, similar to anti-discrimination law, was created with a certain purpose, but then lost track of that and became highly bureaucratized and highly based on paperwork, and therefore started dominating as a medium the life world. But Habermas later realized that it's really not as clear and distinct as it being a medium or an institution. So either being a medium for colonization by the systems or being an institution that emerges from the life world. And Habermas was like, yeah, actually no, most of the examples I'm coming up with, law was initially created always by the life world for a certain purpose, but then lost track of that purpose. So Habermas realized that law is always an institution of the life world, but sometimes it can be colonized by the system's imperatives. And this fits to the examples that we had. Right. We also looked at Martin Jürgen's PhD thesis, in which he studied asylum decisions by Sweden's asylum courts and how they kind of depict refugees, or how they depict the crisis, the refugee crisis. And Martin argued that basically modern capitalism is facing a legitimation crisis, and this is something that Habermas also argues, and that two strategies are used mainly for legitimation of capitalism as it's losing its legitimacy. One being that like legal decisions are being permeated by moral discourse. I say that no, this actually represents what is in your interests. This represents society's wills, and legal procedures are referred to as very rational, so that they can get legitimacy thereby. So on the one hand, legal decisions are referred to as being an institution of the life world. On the other hand, they're being referred to as, the legal decisions are being referred to by Swedish asylum courts as being by the system and therefore cognitive instrumental rationality. So because the procedures are like institutionalized and based on facts, not facts, based on fixed procedures rather than ad hoc decisions, the argument is that legal norms absorb the uncertainties which would emerge if legal decisions were left to a purely moral steering of behavior. So a very interesting dynamic emerges where the system starts saying, hey, no, we're better than what the life world could offer. You should follow us. And this is a means of colonizing the life world. And Habermas refers to this as discursive legitimization, where discourse, again, which is the core of Habermas' theory, where discourse is used to legitimize something. For instance, saying that, yes, okay, we are colonizing the life world through our legal cognitive instrumental rationality, but that's just because legal norms are a means to an end and not an end in itself, kind of. The thing is that Habermas didn't just describe what was going on in the world, but Habermas was a scholar activist. So Habermas was talking about democracy, for instance, what he wants democracy to be like. And he really thought that it's not just law being a representation of the popular will, or that people's that people's opinions are represented, but he thought that democracy is inherently only fulfilled if certain procedures are followed. And Habermas has this thing called discourse ethics, which doesn't mean that he's looking at the ethics of discourse or something, but refers to his ambitions or his ideal of what law should be like. So he really had these ideals of what the world should be like. And by discourse ethics, he refers to that the way discourse should be conducted he really wanted discourse in society, how people come to a consensus, to be conducted in a democratic way. And again, as I just said, by democratic he means that certain procedures are followed. And Habermas argued that only those norms can claim to be valid if they meet or could meet the approval of all people affected if they participated in the discourse. So it's also the all affected principle. So he thought that laws can only be ethical and right if all people affected would agree on the law. And this is the procedure he wanted democracies to follow. So doesn't really care that much about the content, but more really about the everybody should feel this is right. Habermas also finally referred to juridification. And by juridification, he means kind of that just more and more laws are added to previously unregulated spheres. Could be that more activities are regulated, or that everything's regulated to a more detailed extent. And this doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but Habermas thought that it was a good process only as long as it helps people maneuver life more flexibly. If it starts being kind of the system colonizing the life world, he really didn't like it. And here again, welfare laws are a great example of how it can either lead to a lot of paperwork or it can lead to people actually being able to have more security, more income. So there is a duality of two options that can be possible, and Habermas clearly didn't want the paperwork of the welfare state.